Our second reading for today comes from the book of Jeremiah. At that time it will be said to this people and to Jerusalem, "A hot wind comes for me out of the bare heights and the desert, toward the daughter of my people, not to winnow or cleanse, a wind too strong for that. Now it is I who speak in judgment against them, for my people are foolish. They do not know me. They are stupid children. They have no understanding. They are skilled in doing evil, but do not know how to do good. I looked on the earth, and it was complete chaos, and to the heavens, and they had no light. I looked on the mountains, and they were quaking, and the hills moved to and fro. I looked, and there was no one at all, and all the birds of the air had fled. I looked, and the fruitful land was a desert, and all its cities were laid in ruins before the Lord, before his fierce anger. For thus says the Lord, the whole land shall be in a desolation, yet I will not make a full end. Because of this, the earth shall mourn, and the heavens above grow black. For I have spoken, I have purposed, I have not relented, nor will I turn back." May God bless this reading. So today we're going to talk a little bit about lament, and I know that there are a few people who think with the Jaguars season starting today, this will be a helpful message. So prayers to everybody involved that they have a good time. But lament is a thing that shows up in the prophets often. It is a prophetic tool. And we've been talking about prophets for a few weeks now, particularly the prophet Jeremiah. And we've talked about how the prophet tells the truth in a world that is focused on illusion. The prophet sees the world as it could be, the gift that is creation, but can see also where the people have wandered and are not quite on that path anymore. And it is as though they believe that in telling the truth, the world can be transformed. And so today we're going to talk about lament. What is lament? When we hear that word, I think often our minds go to something like complaining, maybe even whining. We get dramatic images of characters from romance movies and books. People who are separated from their partners and they struggle to continue on, and so they give these cries of lament. I also think when you think about lament, you can think about anger in general. Lament is almost like a pouring out of emotion. I used to drive by a rage center. Has anybody seen these before? You go in this room and you put on all this protective gear, and there's china and plates and glass, and they give you a hammer, and you can just have at it. I know that there are a few people who are Googling rage centers right now, but they are a way that you can lament the things in the world that you can't control. You can go and take that frustration out on old china that somebody picked up at Goodwill. But lament, when we think about it, it doesn't always automatically sound like it is a prophetic act. It doesn't even always feel effective. You can get mad and have outbursts of anger or sadness, and it doesn't always feel like it is changing the world. But when the prophets talk about lament, they talk about it as this public act. And often this public act of lament is meant to acknowledge that things aren't the way they ought to be. And in making the lament public, lament becomes this act of solidarity. It's a way that we are able to manifest and name a pain that is already felt in a way that makes folks who are experiencing that pain feel seen and heard and accepted and welcomed. So when the prophet talks about the way society could be, the prophet is always talking about the world that the Bible talks about, where death and tears are no more, where sadness has been eliminated. But we also recognize that we're not there right now, and that there are forces that make that so. that in any world there are folks who benefit from the oppression of others. And one of the reasons why lament is so powerful is that the folks who benefit from the way things are the folks who really would like lament not to exist. They're folks who would like us to pretend happiness. It's like the folks who tell us, why don't you just get over it? But lament is meant to be an emotional outcry that expresses displeasure with the way things are. And that's what makes it a prophetic work. That's what makes it truth-telling. Because it cuts through the narratives that say that things are actually exactly how they ought to be right now. So Walter Brueggemann, who's a biblical scholar who's written a lot about prophets, talks about these two consciousnesses that exist in people. When he's talking about ancient Israel, he talks about the royal consciousness of Pharaoh. Pharaoh, of course, is responsible for the suffering of the slaves under his care. And as Israel leaves Egypt, God would like the people to leave that consciousness behind. When God hands down the law to Israel, it always comes with the same refrain. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and I rescued you. And so there's this understanding that God wants the people not to be that way. Don't be like Egypt was. Get rid of the royal consciousness. And one of the things the royal consciousness does is it does this thing where it says, just be happy. Don't worry about what's wrong. And it creates a situation in which things are just good enough that the people won't complain about it. And the prophet is called by God to go beyond the royal consciousness, to go beyond just simply accepting the way things are. And so the prophet announces the image of God's reaction to the way things are. And if you read our passage from today, it is as though God has entered a rage room. We hear this, a hot wind is to rise up, and a destruction is to come upon the people. Historically, what Jeremiah is writing about is what will become the Exodus, when Jerusalem is sacked by the Babylonians and the people are literally picked up and moved hundreds of miles away to the city of Babylon. But God, in this passage we hear, is angry with the people's failure to live up to their end of the covenant. Again, God is angry that things are not the way they ought to be. God is angry that the people have neglected their role. They have sought power and prestige and wealth and their own security at the expense of others. And what we hear in the prophets is that they have neglected the poor and the marginalized. So this is important when you're thinking about ancient Israel and God's condemnation of the people. The people, you should think about this in our modern world. People is a loaded term. When we say people, if God is condemning the people for mistreating the poor and the marginalized, then God's criticism is not against all of the people. God's people is directed at those who are mistreating people. You can imagine that in this society, in ancient Israel, as well as just about every other human society, there are folks who are doing just fine. There are folks who are benefiting from the status quo. But when the prophet comes and announces God's judgment, it is because in any world you can imagine that would fit an image of God's dream world, there isn't this some benefit and some don't. I can remember the Christian writer Shane Claiborne saying, I don't think God invented too many people or created too many people and not enough food. Right? In any image you can have of God's world as it ought to be, there are not the haves and the have-nots. And so we get this angry outburst in Jeremiah because God is disappointed at the ways in which the people have lived. But this outburst, this judgment, this condemnation, It's not simply aimed at destabilizing what is a nourishing life for all people. Because while some folks are certainly enjoying the society as it is, for some, what God promises, a hot wind that will come through and destroy, a desolation, a destruction, for some, that is already the reality of what life is like. There are those who are not heard, those whose cries fall on the ears of the powerful who ignore them. So we need to remember that when God announces judgment, it is on behalf of those people. And so this is the first thing we need to get about lament. God's emotional outburst is not simply a judgment. It is that, but it is always also an acknowledgement of the way it is for so many people in the society. It is a word that says to the people who are left behind, I see you, and I see what you're going through. And it is giving a voice to neglected groups who already feel like judgment is upon them. That's the power of lament. It's not a triumphant announcement. It's not an I told you so. Rather, it's a lament. So lament is a way that we communicate to the world that something isn't right. And it's not meant to be a passive, quiet plea, but rather it is an outburst that forces those who don't want to listen to listen. I had this experience of lament when I was in divinity school. I was part of a program in which I got to work for a labor union for a summer, which is like both totally unlike being a minister and exactly the same thing, all at the same time. And I went and did this training up in Chicago at a place called the Interfaith Worker Justice, where they would train interns who would then go out to unions and worker centers and would learn how to do that kind of work. But while we were there, we got to participate in a labor action because Chicago is one of those kinds of places where there's a labor action, a strike, a protest, a picket going on all the time. But there was this local group of clergy, and I remember it was an interfaith group. It was Christians and Muslims and rabbis all going to be part of this action, and it was a group of hotel workers that had been on strike for a long time. And this strike hadn't been resolved. And so together with a bunch of other clergy, we went to a board meeting of the hotel chain that was being picketed. I won't tell you which one. You've heard of it. I'll tell you that. But we wanted to go and deliver a message to the board members of this hotel chain. We weren't invited, which they wouldn't have invited us if we had asked. And so we walked into the room, clergy in robes and stoles and collars and all of the thing that clergy wear, and demanded to be heard on behalf of these workers. And it wasn't quiet. We marched into a room where we weren't welcomed. We were threatened with police action, which was a new thing for me at the time. And I can just still remember the ways in which we were told that it was inappropriate that we were there in that way. And I got to tell you, I was just following along. I was like 23 at this time. I didn't know what I was doing. I was told by somebody who was in charge of me, go do this thing, and I did it. And I'm one of the kinds of people, maybe you know these people, who is apprehensive about conflict. And I'm in this place, and there is some shouting and some uncomfortable things going on, and there are people who are telling us, you shouldn't be doing this, this is inappropriate, this isn't the way to be heard. And then I thought about the workers, the folks we had met on the picket line, and these were all the people who make beds and clean rooms, people who keep a hotel running, who were walking the picket line day after day. And I thought about as I was uncomfortable, how uncomfortable they must have felt. Working a hard, difficult job and not getting fair pay for it, not getting fair benefits for it, not getting a hearing in the corporate board meeting where decisions are made about their lives. And I realized that we were going there to deliver this lament. We as clergy were going to this space to express in an emotional way displeasure about the way in which the situation was going. And I realize now, even as I'm uncomfortable in spaces like this to this day, we weren't causing a disruption so much as we were announcing a disruption that already existed in the lives of the employees. And that is part of the role of the prophet, this lament, this explaining that there is already something going on which is not correct. So that's the first thing that lament does. And you can imagine just about any protest situation having the same effect. It's why one of the reasons why whenever there are mass protests and people say, what are they accomplishing? On one hand, I get it. On the other hand, I understand that sometimes you just need to be angry because there's something wrong. You need to be angry because something is not right. But the second thing that lament does, and I actually think this is the much more powerful thing that we need to acknowledge, is that lament ties us to one another. In the labor movement, they call this solidarity. This idea of an I see you. Because in its emotional pleas, lament becomes an I am with you. When God announces judgment and condemnation and anger at the way things are, it is an act of solidarity with those who have been neglected. Because God dreams of a world where all are cared for, and in the places where that is not happening, God laments. But this lament is directed out of a deep solidarity with those who thirst and hunger. In fact, you hear this in Scripture where God says, I heard the cry of my people. God says, I heard the cry of those who were laboring. So lament is a powerful way that we can be together with others. It recognizes that something is wrong and it will not leave it at that. Maybe a way to think about it is to say that the opposite of lament is to say something like, well, why don't you just get over it? And I was thinking a little bit too about what this lament looks like in relationships, what it looks like to lament together, to acknowledge the pain that is felt. And I actually started thinking about a movie, a scene in a movie that really, I think, shows this. I'm guessing most people have seen this movie. It's called Inside Out. People seen this movie. So the movie, if you haven't seen it, it tells the story of a little girl, Riley, who's a preteen, and it focuses on the emotions she experiences: anger, sadness, disgust, fear, and joy. And as a child, joy runs the show. But sadness, anger, and disgust are always there. And so in this movie scene we're going to watch, we are in this girl's head, and joy and sadness are trying to get back to Riley's control center with Riley's imaginary friend, Bing Bong. And Bing Bong is sad because his relationship with Riley is changing. She is outgrowing him. So Joy decides to try to cheer him up, and that doesn't quite work. And that's where we're going to start this clip.
Riley can't be done with me.
Hey, it's gonna be okay. We can fix this. We just need to get back to headquarters. Which way to the train station?
I had a whole trip planned for us.
Hey, who's ticklish, huh? Here comes the tickle monster. Hey, Bing Bong, look at this. Oh, here's a fun game. You point to the train station and we all go there. Won't that be fun? Come on, let's go to the train station.
I'm sorry they took your rocket. They took something that you loved. It's gone. Forever.
Sadness. Don't make him feel worse.
Sorry.
It's all I had left of Riley.
I bet you and Riley had great adventures.
Oh, they were wonderful. Once we flew back in time. We had breakfast twice that day.
Sadness.
It sounds amazing. I bet Riley liked it.
Oh, she did. We were best friends.
Yeah, it's sad.
I'm okay now. Come on. The train station is this way.
And if Facebook flags and takes down our video, we're all going to participate in the lament of writing angry emails. But this shows the power of lament. Sometimes we're like joy, and we want to move so quickly past the hard feelings, past the anger and the sadness and the emotions. And sometimes the answer just is to stop and do the emotional work. Because that's a way that we come together with those who are suffering. It's how we announce that things are not the way they ought to be like the world. And like the movie, it's a step along the way. There is more work to be done. But just acknowledging that there is pain, that's speaking the truth. And often the best way to communicate this isn't by stating the facts, but rather it's by expressing the emotions that are present: anger, sadness, disappointment, and giving room for folks to feel what they are feeling and to not feel alone in doing with it. And so we can look at the work of the prophet and the words of God and realize that it's okay to be angry when anger is what is called for, or to be sad when sadness is what is called for. And we should know that our emotions, including lament, are tools for transforming the world. They build us up, they build community up, and they make things better. They bridge that gap between the way things are and the way they ought to be. So lament, and go Jaguars.